Hello. I am here with Matt Given, CEO of Seesaw. We have a ton to talk about today, including a new acquisition in the Middle East. Before we dig in on any of that, Matt, I'd love, you've been in EdTech for a couple decades. I'd love for you to talk about sort of the narrative arc of your career and how you sort of ended up where you are today as the head of Seesaw.
Sure. Matt, thanks for having me today. I really appreciate it. Yeah, happy to explain and as brief as possible, the last 28-ish years of my life, which has been in education, the business of education for that
Well,
entire
we can riff a little too.
time.
Don't worry.
Yeah, yeah,
I think this
there
is the
are a
fun
couple of
part.
directions. I started out as a test prep teacher at Kaplan back in the 90s and did that while I was racing bikes full time. So to make a little extra money, I was
Oh.
teaching test prep classes.
Like Tour de France racing? What kind of bike racing are
Not
we
the Tour
talking?
de France, but the same type of bicycle, which is where the similarity ends in the US. It's a
Cool.
different type of racing here, but it was a lot of fun and enjoyed it. But yeah, I started teaching test prep classes on the side to make a little extra income. Bike racing is not lucrative whatsoever, and had a lot of fun doing that too. And then started a career with Kaplan that was 12 years long, and really enjoyed myself. We did a couple of different startup businesses within Kaplan. One was called Kaplan K-12 Learning Services, and that was really around the kind of push post No Child Left Behind. So right at the No Child Left Behind era of state testing, and Kaplan, of course, was like kind of a test prep giant, and
Sure.
having that brand and that skill set to go into schools and districts around the country and really focus on their success on standardized testing that the state was now doing was really interesting. And then post that, really, we started building some education technology while I was there. But immediately after that, we started another business called Kaplan Virtual Education when I really dove into EdTech full force and really spent the rest of my career there. And in that time, doing a lot of kind of building of virtual charter schools around the country. That was new at the time. So did a lot of legislative work in the state houses around the country to kind of make sure that we could build and support virtual schools a lot of places. And then it kind of made my way through other ed tech companies, really landing in a spot where I started running companies with a company called Glen Lyon. And Glen Lyon had a couple of different businesses. One was a homeschool business that had some of the best and biggest digital homeschooling products in the country. And the other was the school district focused business called Odysseyware, and that was a full courseware business. And so that was my first job at the total helm of the business, and I've been doing that ever since. And that's been about 10 years at this point through a couple of businesses, with one foray out of K-12 into corporate training right before Seesaw, but came to Seesaw.
You're like, no, thank you. I don't need any more of that.
It was great, and it's an amazing business. And but there's something about the little kids, even the high school kids, but there's something about that's really rewarding. And I just was drawn back to it. And now with Seesaw, we're really focused on the much younger learners. That's a little new for me too, because most of the stuff I've done throughout my career is kind of that high school focus set. So this is great.
Yeah, I so many different directions we could go. I definitely empathize with you know, the being able to balance, having a nice lifestyle with feeling like you're making student impact. I think that's what attracted me to starting and staying in the industry. And I also think I know of at least one other professional cyclist in the EdTech diaspora.
Oh yeah,
So that's Curtis Barnes. If you've ever come across him, he was a longtime Pearson guy and now leads the IMS consortium.
nice.
So, which is now One EdTech. Sorry, they rebranded. But I maybe we could go there, but I'd actually love to hear the Kaplan Mafia is I think probably deserves more attention than it gets. Maybe it doesn't get attention by design, but I'd love if you have any just like interesting anecdotes or thoughts on the sort of these Kaplan era. There were so many good people have come out of that. So I sort of open-ended question, but I think
Yeah.
there's a lot.
Yeah, it's interesting. There are a group of us that were together for a long time, and there's some, that we weren't like didn't work directly together, but there are a lot of ed tech leaders that came out of that kind of time period at Kaplan and that core. And I think we've actually, as a group or as some group, a lot of us have talked about that before and why that is and how that came to be. And I think there were a couple of really interesting things about my career and some of the things I loved about it. But when a lot of us came out of the Kaplan Test Prep Center, which was the original Kaplan, like that's what Kaplan was at its inception, was kind of these test prep centers to train kids to take their SAT or the GRE or GMAT or whatever it is. And when you managed a test prep center, they got young people that they felt like could be really successful, and you had soup to nuts management of of a physical location, all the marketing, all the hiring, all the training, what was going on with the classes and the logistics of that. So you're kind of in this very deep end first uh, pool where you had to figure out everything soup to nuts from the P&L.
Sounds
And you
really
you remember this.
entrepreneurial.
Yeah, it really was. And this was post for me, post the franchise era. The Kaplan had bought back all the franchises. It was a franchise model for a while. So this is all corporate owned stuff. And we had this really unique group of people that, were thrown into the deep end, like I said, but had to
Yeah.
figure out how to run a business soup to nuts at a very young age. And I think we all did that. And so that shared experience of those times is one of the things that draws people close together. And I think that's a lot of the reason a lot of us are still close. And we are. I think people, Stuart Udell is the CEO of Prometric, and he's been, he and I have worked together on multiple instances over the years. And, Seppi Basili was another great person that is now runs the Jack Kent Cooke Foundation, and we were all together having a great time running around trying to like help bigger school districts for a long time and did really interesting work. But we were together for a long time and had very similar upbringings in business, which
Yeah.
is really fascinating.
I love that. I actually didn't know that it was a franchise model and then got in-house. I'm curious to make a little bit of a leap here, and it's okay if you don't have a fully formed thought. When I think about today's education savings account environment and the way that the school choice sort of wave, and I think it's fair objectively to say that it is a wave crossing the country. My mind goes to are the sort of winners of that wave going to be full stack providers or franchisors or something in the middle? I think I could argue both sides, and you probably could argue them both even better than me. But I'm curious if that feels like an apt comparison, or do you have any thoughts related to that?
I mean, it's the school choice side, like just watching what's happening politically is really fascinating. And I, on the balance of things that I think are probably the right way to do it at scale, I'm not sure that, having this blown apart anything goes model is the right way to do it. And I spent a lot of time in the charter space, both the virtual charter
Yeah,
space, and then I was at Edison Learning for years, for 3 years as well. So I know the charter space really well, and I know the private school space very well as well. And it's, there are definitely successes around that. It's interesting though, like the efficiency is in the school districts, though. I think that's where kind of some of the efficiency is. Like pulling significant dollar support from the school district is probably not great for society. Like that's probably not the best way to do it. There are pockets, and there should be choice, and there should be different models, and all those things are true. There's not one way to do it, but I think we're doing kind of the mass a disservice if we really pull away from public education in a significant way. And so it's I'm watching cautiously. And again,
yeah,
I think there are going to be great pockets of individual success around school choice models and things like that. I think there are probably going to be some fantastic schools that come out of that. That's all true. However, there are hundreds of millions of people to educate, and there's an infrastructure to do that right now, and we need to support it, I think, as well as we can, and not really undermine it to a significant degree. So it's I think supporting public educators is kind of a critical civic duty, and I would hate to see it just dismantled by slowly chipping away at things, even though there are going to be some success stories out of that too. But I think that's probably not the best way to handle it.
yeah. I appreciate the nuance of that answer. Like, understanding there are some like competitive forces that could be net positive, but also understanding we have a civic duty and making sure that we don't lose sight of that civic duty to, all students. So I think that's really important. And I think, also to your point, like there are some great networks of private schools and charter schools that have emerged, even before this sort of wave started. So thinking about how winners might emerge in that vein is a really important point, that you can have winners while still maintaining that focus on civic duty.
Yeah, that's maybe the balancing act for sure.
Yeah, cool. Well, I one of the big reasons that we wanted to get together today was talking about international expansion and being a US company thinking about international markets, and do you buy, do you build, do you do some of both? Obviously you guys chose to buy in the Middle East. Just these past couple of months you added Little Thinking Minds. Could you take us through sort of the like strategy process that led to that acquisition and that market, and sort of why it was the right decision for you at this time?
Yes, some of the things are really straightforward for us. Some of that's in hindsight too, but some of the things are
Yeah, of
straightforward
course.
for us, meaning like Seesaw had tremendous organic growth internationally. The application is relatively, if not totally unique in a lot of spaces in the world. You know, we are a learning experience platform specifically tailored to that early learner. That's not a common thing, right? So as we get categorized into different buckets like LMS or something like that, and we can fulfill that functionality, LMSs weren't built for elementary kids, and they're not appropriate for really young elementary kids because you might have pre-readers or low-level readers and some other things, and LMSs really aren't built for that. And the Seesaw platform has kind of the experience and the tools to appeal and be accessible to this wide variety of learners from even pre-readers forward and even kids with certain learning disabilities and things like that. So the focus of the application on things like universal design, instead of building a high school LMS and then trying to make it tool it for other things through different fonts and colors and things like that, that wasn't what we did. And so we saw really tremendous growth and adoption internationally, especially through that COVID period when elementary schools around the world were sending kids home and they needed some way to communicate with those children and for those children to interact with them remotely. And a lot of growth came from that. Post that period, we've seen Seesaw really expand into the classroom application. So teachers really leveraging what's happening in Seesaw to drive and then record what's happening in the real world in the classroom and not just keep kids on the device at all. And a lot of what Seesaw does is intentionally to not do that, to have teachers be able to kind of schedule and understand kids, what they're doing, and then have those kids record what's happening in their
Hmm.
real environment, not on the device, not interacting with, a gamified program on the device. That's not really what Seesaw does. And so we saw tremendous adoption all over the world, and we were in 150 plus countries, had pretty significant penetration into the English markets outside the US, and then some nascent penetration into the non-English speaking or non-core English speaking markets as well. And so we saw that continue to have strength and continue to grow. And as we put out new versions of Seesaw and new products, we saw that being taken up by the international audience as well. And then we really thought, how do we serve those kids that are not English focused, right? So most EdTech apps from the US are built in US English for obvious reasons, and
Yeah.
that's the way
Yeah.
things work. But what if we took a more like very intentional approach to be not only in language, so again, not just translating words on the page, but being idiomatic and ready for younger learners in a different country that don't speak English at home and that's not their primary language, even if they might learn it at school, it's not the way they're instructed. And so how would we approach that? And so we thought about obviously the major languages around the world and places where we
Sure.
already had some traction. And so we started thinking about how our UI would change, how our approach to education would change if we were to do Seesaw in Portuguese, Seesaw in Spanish, Seesaw in French. And we've released those this month. And so this month, you can access Seesaw in US English and British idiomatic English and Australian idiomatic English and Portuguese and French and Spanish, and Arabic's on the horizon. And one of the reasons Arabic's on the horizon for us particularly is one, we already had some success in MENA, in the kind of Middle East, North Africa. But two, the market there is in dire need of some real tools, especially for early learners and especially in Arabic. And Arabic in particular is one of those languages where, the currency of social media, the currency of other things that everybody around the world is exposed to has kind of drifted to English. And because that's where those
Yeah.
apps are from and that's how people communicate in entertainment around the world and things like that. And so
Culture.
yeah, and culture. A lot of countries are afraid of their culture and their
Yeah.
language disappearing. And so Arabic is not the easiest language in the world to learn, especially the formal writing and reading of Arabic. And so it's done at a much lower level, even in the Arab world, than a comparable English
Hmm.
reader might do in the US.
I
A
didn't
much
know that.
yeah. So, and the statistics are really interesting there. So we found an application in Little Thinking Minds that had this really amazing approach toward Arabic literacy for native speakers, for non-native speakers. And recently they added some formative assessments around, or excuse me, an assessment platform around this Arabic reading and learning. And we wanted to put Seesaw in Arabic as well. We wanted to bring Seesaw more idiomatically to the Arab world. And one of the ways we felt was going to be really challenging to do was to do that remotely from the US. And so as we found this company that was very aligned with Seesaw's values and mission, we are also heavily involved in literacy because our focus is early learners. So it's natural
Sure.
that reading is a big piece of the puzzle. So finding a like-minded company in the Middle East that had expertise in Arabic was kind of this huge, win-win is beat to death and an
Well,
overused
I
term.
get it.
But they know Arabic literacy incredibly well and have a lot of success in the region doing that. And they can be now our internal partner to really develop Seesaw for that marketplace as well. And that's 600 million plus Arab speakers. It's a massive market and one of the top languages in the world. And actually, after Spanish in the US, it's the number 2 language. English,
Oh,
Spanish, Arabic. And it's really fascinating. We actually have already started to see some demand for Little Thinking Minds in the US from some school systems that have a large Arab population. So it was a great fit for us. It was something that we thought was also highly interesting. So for the people in the business, it was a real business problem, a real business challenge to solve that was not kind of the blocking and tackling, rinse and repeat way to do things. Like we had to go figure this out and figure it out with them together. And it's been really gratifying. In fact, a lot of our tech team and tech leadership is in Jordan right now with the team at Little Thinking Minds, getting them all wrapped into Seesaw technology and what we're doing there. So it's been a really rewarding experience right out of the gate.
that's cool. I sort of think of the ed tech industry in eras, right? And I feel like this sort of 20, call it 2010, 2012 to 2018, 19 era pre-COVID, um, was really focused on trying to make ed tech enterprise SaaS. And you had some fairly substantial results from that, right? You had Kahoot scaling all over the world. And it more or less worked all over the world because of the product that it is. Had I guess the major LMSs were mostly US with sort of a smattering of international, and then Moodle took the international market for probably many of the reasons that you elucidated of, the Moodle was open enough that folks could customize it to their idiomatic preferences. And I think what I appreciate about the Little Thinking Minds and your overall international strategy is it's instead of trying to sort of push this sort of core Seesaw product onto others, it's saying, well, let's try to understand who they are as a population first, and then see, whether the product's a good fit, right? Like, almost as interesting of where you are going is where you're choosing not to go, right? And I'm sure there are a million different reasons for, choosing not to go to like Japan. But just saying like, yeah, we think we can do a good job understanding the idiomatic preferences of a Portuguese speaker, right? Of a Spanish speaker. Like, actually, Arabic's going to be pretty darn hard. So let's find a team that can do that and can push us to be better there. And I think like that's a really important takeaway for startups who, it's always the like easiest page on the pitch deck is international expansion.
Right.
And my first question is always, well, where? Like, why do you think you have a right to play in that market? Like, beyond sort of arrogance.
Humorous.
That's a long way of saying, I appreciate the thoughtfulness behind the way that you've done it. I guess are there any sort of funny quirks of buying a company in the Middle East, like things you didn't expect? Like I think you've been mostly focused on the US market for your career. What is it like sort of expanding your horizons as a company leader?
Yeah, I've done a lot of acquisitions. My last role at Serify, we did 13 acquisitions, I believe, so quite a few. But and only a couple outside the U.S. and those were Canada, so nothing
Sure. Yeah,
dramatic different. But some of the basic things are we were ready for some of them, we were not ready for others, but there are a lot of countries, right? So it's not the
yeah,
U.S. and you have the same set of laws and regulations and rules and mores. Little Thinking Minds operates in a dozen countries throughout the Middle East, and they have presence. Now we have entities in KSA and the UAE and Jordan, et cetera, and Egypt. And so we had to figure out how to have and operate entities across the world in that way. And then some of those documents are not in English; they're in Arabic. And so
yeah,
our core team doesn't. So getting documents translated, understanding that even dates are on a different calendar in
right.
some documents in some countries. And so what does this relate to? Just understanding some of those basics were really
And the
educating.
work week too
The work
is
week, yep,
different.
that's right. That's right. Friday, Saturday is the weekend, and the time difference. We do have folks in the UK. My CFO, fortunately, is in the UK for this particular acquisition. That was a huge, huge
Yeah.
benefit. But she did just tremendous work deciphering and figuring out all the nuts and bolts. And we had some really nice legal support as well, helping us figure it out. But it was very complex for the scale of the business, right? So it was not the biggest business in the universe, but because of the complexities of the region, and it's not a bunch of states, it's a bunch of different countries. You're actually
Right.
dealing with laws in a different way. So that was all fascinating and hard and challenging, but worth it to do it because now we've got a much better understanding and certainly foothold in the region. It's on par with our UK and Australia business, which are our two largest markets outside the US. So the Middle East is on par with those two businesses right now. And we're pushing towards a 60-40 business. Like we're in the 65-35 at the moment, US to international, or outside the US. And it's really fascinating. But yeah, tons of learnings, getting more familiar with the culture and the mores across the different countries, which are different from one another. As I said, I've been spending a lot of time over there this year. I've been over on a few trips. It's far away. It's off the time zone, and culturally it's different too. But that is, I think, one of the things that's like the best part about my job is getting to learn different things like that and kind of playing in different places a lot. And I think the team at Seesaw has found that too, that it's really rewarding to actually figure out something different, versus kind of, again, rinsing and repeating things you've done multiple times before.
Yeah. At one point in a past role, I had to coordinate a meeting that had a stakeholder in Singapore, a stakeholder in Saudi Arabia, a stakeholder in London, and a stakeholder in San Francisco. And I was like, I don't know, guys, this just might not happen.
Yeah, we're now doing that on a regular basis, and it's nuts.
Somebody's getting burned on this. I'm sorry.
Well, the other thing we've done recently to that point is we established an office in Malaysia as well,
Cool.
because, our market is really in three big sectors and they're kind of spread across the globe. So we have a pretty substantial Oceania business, Australia,
Neat.
New Zealand, in that area. Now between MENA and Europe, because the UK and MENA are close enough in time zone, they're only
Sure.
about 3 hours apart. So that is our biggest sector outside time zone sector outside the US, and then the US, Canada, Mexico, and South America. So we've started to put Seesaw employees around the world to be able to kind of be more in sync with our customer base from a time and idiom perspective. But that's a change, right? Like that's a big change to have the global workforce that's literally global, not just dabbling globally.
Yeah, you really have to think hard about even things as simple as scheduling an all hands. And do you do multiple all hands? How do you make sure they don't slack each other between the different all hands timings? I want to be respectful of your time, so maybe just a couple of fun ones to end here. One thing that I like to ask, just because it's again sort of fun to hear what the answer is. If as you sort of survey the edtech ecosystem, what are some of the models and or products that sort of catch your eye that are, hopefully like imagine a different market from Seesaw, right? Like not a competitor, but like things that sort of catch your eye of like, oh, huh, I didn't know a business could exist in that part of the ed tech world, or that business is growing way faster than I expected, or that product is super neat. Any of that sort of jump to mind?
I mean, the obvious answer these days is like who's doing something that's actually interesting with artificial intelligence, with AI,
Sure.
and doing
Yeah.
something, seeing what's going to actually stick, or is going to be of quality, right? So there's a
Yeah.
lot of noise, there's a lot of flashy things and noise around it. There are not a lot of good applications of it, and some of them are literally doing the same thing as the next guy wrapping something around ChatGPT, and it's supposed to be a workflow tool or a lesson planning tool or something like that, and they're just not very good. And so we watch that all the time. So like asking me that question, like what's out there, that's what we're spending our time looking at. I think there
Sure.
are the things that are fascinating from a business perspective sometimes are the way more boring things, like what's going on in the back office of all these. How do you manage all these things in education? And there's some really huge players there that have done incredibly well. And it's some of those unseen, but really successful ed tech businesses that are just kind of in the background. But looking forward, we're trying to figure out, how do we best support our teachers and students and parents through continually pushing the envelope of the functionality. And so when we look broadly out into things like what's happening with AI, and we've been incorporating AI features for our teachers into Seesaw, just trying to keep something that's on par with our current reputation, which is very high for quality and it's very high for teacher love, and making sure that happens. But as we watch out and look out into the world, like that's the stuff that we're obviously paying attention to, because that's what
You have to.
is the shiny object at the moment. And one thing, love it or hate it from an education perspective, educators do sometimes nod to the shiny object for a while. There are definitely trends that pop up and pop down over time. So trying to
I
watch out.
do just want to, for any entrepreneurs sort of paying attention here, it took 26 minutes for us to bring up AI. So like,
I
I
try to
promise you, you can have an interesting conversation about
play
education
without it.
without saying the
Yeah.
word AI. Like, I know that you have AI sort of wrapped into a lot of your products, but to me, a sign of a successful implementation is not having to call it AI. You can call it by the function that it delivers rather than the sort of, chicanery that creates it.
Yeah, we probably underplay it, frankly, because we've got some things that are, on par and better with some of the other companies that are totally dedicated to it. But we've been working on it too. And so, do you go with somebody trusted and scalable that's, got all the privacy and security in the universe wrapped around it, or do you go with something nascent? Like I think those are interesting issues for established companies that have, presences. So we think about it a little bit differently, I think, than somebody who's fresh out of the gate, but we've got a little bit more responsibility too.
Yeah, look, I think it's important, and I do genuinely believe that like the more layman's terms you can talk about any feature, right? Whether it's AI or not, the better off you are as a business because it's more understandable. Awesome. Well, I do want to let you go. I appreciate you taking this time. Any final notes, things you want to get off your chest, things you want to plug? Do you have any speaking opportunities or other things that you're looking forward to in the next month or two?
Yeah, nothing. No, I've just come back off a really long travel set with a lot of this international side. I went to Jordan after we closed the acquisition to meet the entire team and in Jordan, and just came back from a really fascinating Apple ecosystem partner event in London with Apple. We've kind of really moving that partnership and connectivity forward. It's been very exciting. So this summer is hopefully going to be a little bit more quiet in the planning phase, and for the
Fingers crossed.
it's like a little bit more quiet on the travel side. But it is the third quarter for the U.S., right? So this is the time that the business side of it really comes into play, and what's going to happen in our biggest market is going to happen over the next 2 to 3 months, and so. We are heads down for the next little bit. That said, in the fall, open up more travel, more conferences. We do our all company event because we're 100% remote, with the exception of our new Jordan office in the fall, and we'll do another like kind of a Middle East focus all company event in the fall too. But yeah, hopefully, I'm just hoping it's a little quieter at this moment than it's been the last few months. But it's all been good stuff, just busy.
Yeah, well, yeah, super exciting. And congratulations on the acquisition. It's super exciting for me as an observer to see, like I said, this international expansion sort of problem set is one I hear about a lot, but don't get to dig in with folks on. So I'm grateful. And I'm excited to keep following along.
Now, Matt, I appreciate it. Uh, I will tell you one anecdote. This is probably not for the recording, but it's just funny. When I was at the Apple event in Battersea last week, there were several people in Apple education. They're also named Matt. And so they came up to me and they said, do you like plural nouns? And I was like, I love plural nouns, a pod of whales, etc. He said, do you know what a group of Matts is called? And I said, I have no idea. And he said, it's an awesome of Matts.
I agree
Plural noun. That's the
wholeheartedly.
of Matts. There you go. And my retort was that my favorite one though is, and do you know this? What is a group of squid called?
No,
A squad. It's
a
my
squad of squid.
squad of squid is my
Say
favorite.
that 5 times fast.
That's right. Squad of squid. But an awesome match
That's
to get.
amazing. I am definitely going to parrot that line as often as possible. Awesome.
Awesome.
Thanks, Pat.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you.